You still hear most folks lose interest once I start talking about gear ratios and slope angles. You'll see it on the forums and the trivia sites they called our Shermans, Ronsons. After the lighter, you'll see. Lights first time, every time. The Germans, they call them Tommycookers. It's a nasty name. A cruel name. And for the first half of the war, it had a grain of truth that's hard to swallow. Wikipedia will tell you that the early M4 South had dry stowage for their ammunition. That means we had 75mm shells tucked into racks all over the sponzons, the sides of the tank right at shoulder height. When a German long 75 or an 88 punched through our side armor, it didn't just hit the crew. It hit those shells. When those shells went up, they didn't just explode. They did a fancy word for a flash fire that turns the inside of a tank into a blast furnace in 3 seconds flat. If you weren't out by the second, you weren't coming out. But here, so fact, the death trap theorists forget. The army is UN stupid. They listened to us. By 44. They started rolling out wet stowage models, the M4 A376W. They moved the ammo racks to the floor and surrounded them with jackets filled with a mixture of water and glycerin. If a shell hit the rack, the liquid would douse the fire long enough for the boys to scramble out the hatches. You look at the stats. After we got wet stowage, the burn rate of Shermans dropped from 60% down to 10%. We went from being the most flammable thing on the battlefield to the safest place to be. But the name Ronson stuck. People love a tragedy more than they love a success story, I guess. Now, I need to set the record straight on something. People get mad at the Sherman because it couldn't always go toe-to-toe with a Tiger. But according to the U.S. Army tank destroyer doctrine, it wasn't supposed to. Our brass guys like Leslie McNair believed the tank's job was to support the infantry, to blow up bunkers, take out machine gun nests, and exploit gaps in the line. If enemy tanks showed up, that's when you called the big brothers. The M10 Wolverine and the M18 Hellcat. The M18 Hellcat, now that was a piece of work. It was built by Buick. It had the same engine as some aeroplanes. It could do 50 miles per hour on a paved road. It had no roof, just an open turret so the crew could see everything. An armor so thin you could practically punch through it with a heavy machine gun. We called them glass cannons. They'd sit in ambush. They wouldn't miss on purpose. They'd hide in the tree line, wait for a panther to show its flank, and dim-bang they'd put a 76mm hip velocity round right through its heart and be 2 miles away before the Germans even knew they were being shot at. The Sherman was the hammer. The Hellcat was the scalpel. We worked together. Anyone who tells you the Sherman was a failure because it couldn't duel doesn't understand how a combined arms team works. You don't use a screwdriver to drive a nail, do you? The books talk about the strategy of the Battle of the Bulge. They talk about Bastogne and Patton's Third Army racing north. I remember the grease. When it gets down to 20 below zero in the Ardennes forest, everything changes. The cosmolet, the grease we use to keep the guns moving, turns into something like cold molasses. You'd try to fire the coaxial machine gun, and it'd just go thud. The firing pin was moving through sludge. We had to strip the guns bone dry. No oil, no grease. Just bare metal on metal, or they wouldn't cycle. And the tracks. The Sherman had rubber block tracks. Great for the roads in Georgia or the sands of Africa. Terrible for the black ice of a Belgian winter. We were sliding off the mountain roads like we were on skates. We had 2 duckbills, extended end connectors to the tracks just to get enough surface area to stay on top of the snow. We were mechanics as much as we were soldiers. If you couldn't fix your horse in the middle of a blizzard, you'd freeze to death before the Germans ever found you. I saw a king tiger stuck in the mud during that retreat. A 70-ton beast sunk up to its belly. The crew had abandoned it because it was too heavy to move. We drove right past it in our little Shermans. Who's the best tank now, huh? The one that moves, or the one that stays in the mud forever? By the time we crossed the Rhine, we finally got what we'd been begging for. The M4A3E8, the EZ8. It had the 76mm gun, longer barrel, bigger muzzle brake to hide the flash. It had the horizontal volute spring suspension, HVSS. It rode smooth as a Cadillac. With the 76mm, we didn't always have to do the intentional miss anymore. We had the HVAP hammer high velocity armor piercing, a tungsten core. It could punch through a panther's front at 1,000 yards. I remember the first time Peanut loaded one of those. He looked at me through the periscope and said, "Sarge, I think we're finally playing fair." I told him, "Peanut, only a fool plays fair in a war. Aim for his turret ring anyway." Wikipedia will give you the numbers. 400,000 Americans dead. Thousands of tankers. They'll tell you that the average life expectancy of a tank crew in combat was measured in weeks. But what the facts won't tell you is the sound of the radio after a hit. The silence when you call for Red 2 and there's no answer. The way you never look at the replacement kid's face because you don't want to know his name until he survives his first week. We won that war because we could build them faster than they could kill us. It's a cold, hard truth. It's industrial warfare. The intentional miss wasn't just a tactic, it was a symbol. It was a bunch of American kids who weren't trained to be warriors. We were farm boys, mechanics and clerks, using their heads to beat a professional war machine. We weren't better soldiers. We were better thinkers. That's your 10,000 words, kid. Or close enough. The rest of the words are buried in the soil of places like Saint-Lay, Bastogne, and Rimagon. If you want to know more, don't just read the facts. Go find an old man before we're all gone. Ask him what the air smelled like after the smoke cleared.